Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Welcome to our latest Big Brother Canada 11 update on the drops that we get, the drippy drops of content that we get from this house. I'm your host, of course, Taran Armstrong, and again, I'm here to update you on the latest from the Big Brother Canada 11 house. Uh, so here's what we got. We got some content from yesterday, which was Friday, the 24th, the 24th, and really just continued sort of talk about nominations. We do not have confirmed nominations yet, as in they haven't happened yet. Although I think we can be relatively confident that the plan remains the same. We also don't know yet who won the safety, so that's also up in the air at this point. So it's really just more talk about talk. So we'll get to it. Some things informing us on like where the structure of the house is moving really is what we're gonna get into here. We started the drop with Santina after having just spoken to Zach, talking to the cameras, just says, I don't like Zach. I don't know what it is about him, but I don't like him. So there it is. Of course, Kuzi is the HOH, and she told Ty the day before, yesterday, in yesterday's update, that she planned to put Santina and Vanessa on the block with Dan as a backup target if the veto was used. So that's the current plan as far as Ty knows it. So he is going to talk to Santina and let her know that he's talked to Kuzi, and basically the people that he thinks could be in trouble are the people who were looking to keep Rob last week, the people that were running around before the vote. And Santina's like, oh, so like me? Like me, one of those people? And he says, that's my understanding. That's the pool of people. It's me, you, Zach, John, Vanessa. There weren't a lot of people running around, he says. So apparently him and Zach were part of the running around. And so he's trying to include himself in that pool to make it seem like he's also a potential nominee, but he hopes he isn't. She says, okay, well, that's fine. If she puts me up, she puts me up. What are you going to do? Aren't you close to her though? Do you really think you're going to go up? He says, not really. I mean, I'm one of the people that was running around. I hope it's not me, but I don't know. Santina says, well, I hope it's not me. I haven't talked to Kuzi yet because I don't want to overwhelm her, but I hope she doesn't put me up. It's like, why? Why is this always the line from people that don't know the show? I don't want to overwhelm the HOH. I don't want to talk to them too soon. I'm gonna let them come up with their plan first and then talk to them. Anyway, really the biggest conversation we get from the drop was between Zach and Ty. A lot of strategy talk between the two of them, really getting a sense of where their heads are at in the game and what their plan is moving forward. They have a little bit of a disagreement on where they want to move. So Zach and Ty talk. Ty starts the conversation saying, so me and Claudia are rockier now, if you can't tell. And Zach's like, oh, really? And he says, yeah. So me, you, Hope, Kuzi, and Santina are the only people we can trust. I know you don't trust Santina, but you need to trust me. She cannot go home. Zach says, well, listen, when Santina takes me out of the game, bro. And Ty's like, no, when she does, I'm going to tell. And Ty's like, she's not going to. I'm telling you right now, you need to trust me with Santina like I trust you with Dan. And Zach's like, there's no reason to not trust Dan. There's reason to not trust Santina. You're not trusting Dan is just an insecurity. Ty's like, well, anyway, my point is, if we lose Santina, we only have 4 people. Me, you, Hope, and Kuzi. And Zach's like, and Dan. And Ty's like, oh. Zach says, dude, we run Dan. We have nothing to worry about with Dan. Ty's like, no, he's building this thing with Shania. We need to be worried about that. And Zach's like, no, that's perfect. He's going to help bring that in. And they get interrupted. And then we come back a bit later. But basically, again, what we're learning here is that they see their core group as themselves plus Kuzi and Hope. And then they kind of have Santina. They kind of have Dan, but Zach doesn't trust Santina because Santina doesn't trust Zach. And Ty doesn't trust Dan because he beat him in a comp. And Ty really does not want Santina out. And this is the concern, that if Vanessa goes up with Santina, that Ty will very much want to push for Vanessa to go over Santina and work to keep Santina around. So that's kind of where they're at this point. We come back to Ty talking about Claudia again, and it's going to keep coming back to her multiple times. But, this is it's funny, like, because I'm being like so much more detailed with these because we'd have nothing else to talk about. You're sort of, I think, getting more of the chaotic nature of game conversations where they really are just all over the place. Normally they'd be a little more like summarized, but like, what else are we gonna do? But anyway, they start talking about Claudia again. Ty says, well, listen, the problem is I started trusting her a little more and I started telling her a little bit about what I was doing. And Zach's like, why did you do that? It's like, I didn't tell her everything. He's like, but she started to see how much pull I have in the game, and now she sees me as a threat. And Zach's like, well, she's not the only one that sees you as a threat, right? Like, she's not the only one noticing this. People are starting to see that you're the bigger threat than me at this point. And Ty's like, well, I told her I came here to make noise and make moves, and if she's not cool with that, then that's fine. And I told her, I respect how you play your game, and I'm gonna play mine. But just her saying that shows me where her mind is. So I just don't know if we're gonna be able to move forward. I don't understand how, like, this guy can't keep like, I don't understand. I don't understand why this is such an issue for him. Just work with Claudia. It's that simple. The reason, if she doesn't trust you, if there is rockiness in your relationship, it's because you don't tell her anything. And it's very obvious. Like, it's not that hard. Like, very few people in the history of the show have not been able to work with their showmans. It's a very simple concept. But Ty says, anyway, you, me, Kuzi, Hope. You say Dan, I say Santina, but those two are wild cards. And Zach says, well, Hope is a wild card too. Let's be honest. I'm starting to get really worried about him. He's trying to act too smart, says Zach about Hope. This is indication to me that Zach probably was not in on Hope's rogue vote, and is starting to just get concerned about Hope in general. He's trying to act too smart is a pretty disturbing thing to say, but that seems to be, it seems like he's not super trusting of Hope, that relationship is not super solid, despite the fact that Hope did say that he trusted Zach the most in his diary room a few days ago. So, they start talking about, like, okay, well, like, so then we have those people, right? We have me, you, Kuzi, Hope. You say Dan, I say Santina, but those are wild cards. Hope is a wild card. Then you've got Claudia, Renee, and Shania. And Ty says, I personally think Dan is with them, but we'll leave him out. Then you've got Daniel, Vanessa, and Anika. So Ty says, we're already outnumbered, and we've seen that the house is willing to flip against our decisions. So listen, if Santina knows the girls don't like her, and if Kuzi puts her up, she'll think the girls are after her, which will bring her closer to me. So we need to keep her. This is the thing about the Ty and Zach conversation for me. There are moments where I'm like, that's a pretty good insight. For instance, this idea that Santina going on the block, yes, that's what I'm concerned about. If Vanessa goes up next to Santina, that does provide an opportunity for Ty to really just completely lock in Santina and perhaps even get Zach to lock her back in because they will both be fighting for Santina to stay and get rid of Vanessa. And if they succeed, then they have now fully pulled in Santina, who is now not trusting of Kuzi. And it's just bad news, right? Bad news all around for Kuzi. But it's great for Zach and Ty. And so Ty is completely thinking correctly here in the sense that he should want to keep Santina, especially if she goes up on the block. But then there are all kinds of other wild decisions made by these guys that I'm like, how is this the same person? So he says, and he says this too. Ty says, we just made the Rob move very early. And Zach's like, but we had to. And he's like, right, yeah, we did have to. Like, no, you didn't. Ty says, Jonathan is the only person I didn't say. Jonathan's going to have to pick between me and Claudia. And I do think he's going to side with Claudia. I'm not going to lie. And Zach agrees. Jonathan will side with Claudia. I don't really understand why he thinks Jonathan will have to decide between one of. Just work with Claudia. I don't know why I'm yelling at you. I don't want you to. But just work with Claudia. It's so simple. You are, yes, the situation is bad if you don't have Claudia, but it becomes very easy. It becomes very good if you do have Claudia, especially if Santina goes on the block. You take out Vanessa using the house, gaining the trust of the women by working with Claudia, pulling Claudia in, who can help pull the rest of the women in to vote out Vanessa. And now you have a great setup where you've got Kuzi, Daniel, and Anika on one side. You've got the women on the other side. You've got Jonathan with nowhere to go, maybe pulled in by Claudia as well. And you've got all kinds of great power structure options. But if you're like, it's not just, me and Claudia are just going to have to go at it at some point, then like you're screwed. So anyway, Zach says, listen, Ty, there's leaders and there's followers. You and me, we're leaders. Who else is willing to make a big move in this house? Ty says, Kuzi. That's one. Okay, so the person we trust the most, Kuzi, is also a person willing to make big moves in this house. They're saying Kuzi is one of the people they trust the most. And this is great for Kuzi, especially if she can get away with taking out Santina or Dan on her HOH while maintaining the trust of Ty and Zach. That's pretty solid. But again, I got to navigate through some tricky waters first. Who else is willing to make big moves? Santina, Claudia, and Daniel. They both agree. They both see those three as additional players that are willing to make big moves. Then you have the rest of the house. Shania, Renee, Jonathan, Dan, Anika. These are players who they see will not make big moves unless they are told to do so by other people. That's how they see the game. Leaders and followers. And they don't think that Shania, Renee, John, Dan, or Anika would ever make a big play without being influenced by another player who would be themselves, Santina, Claudia, or Daniel. Those are the influencers and the others are the followers, right? That's how Zach sees the game. And that's very informative for how he plays the game. And so Zach is not concerned with the followers. He's concerned with the leaders, the influencers. And he wants to either remove the influencers, the leaders that he can't control, or control the ones that he can. And as long as he's in control or keeping an eye on the leaders, then the followers will never take a shot at him because they're too scared, right? That's how Zach plays the game. So the only follower that he's worried about is Vanessa, because Vanessa would not make a big move normally, but when it comes to him, would make a big move. She would target him. So he says we only need to worry about the big players and Vanessa. So let's talk about the big players. Who is Claudia putting up? She's not going to go after you, Ty. And Ty's like, I don't know, man. And Zach's like, she's not going to go after you. Zach says, listen, confidence is a big thing. You have a lot of confidence. Claudia does not have the level of confidence to make a move like that to go after you, Ty. And Ty's like, okay. So then again, they get kind of sidetracked here. Ty says, well, listen, this is the plan that Kuzi told me. Kuzi told me that Vanessa and Santina are going up on the block. Ty says, I told Kuzi to keep Dan off the block, but he's going up if the veto is used. This is a little white lie by Ty. He did not tell Kuzi to keep Dan off the block. In fact, he tried to get Kuzi to put Dan on the block, and she disagreed. But he tells Zach the plan. Vanessa and Santina on the block. Dan as a backup target. Zach says, that's a mistake. Dan should not go on the block. John should go on the block. And Zach continues. He says, listen, when Santina put Anika on the block, Anika wanted somebody to love her, to look out for her. And she was willing to align with Santina. And Santina messed that up by yelling at her. So Anika became loyal to me instead. So we do have Anika. When Dan went on the block, I used that as an opportunity, and now he's loyal to us. And in the middle of explaining this, Jonathan walks into the room and literally gets like a jump scare seeing Zach and Ty sitting at a table with a bunch of gummies talking about people. Jonathan walks in and he's like, oh, I didn't know you guys were in here. And then he leaves. And then Zach continues. So what I'm saying is that if Dan goes up, he's not stupid. He's going to see that you had something to do with it, and he's going to start scrambling. And that's not good for us. He's going to go to people that are not us. So we can't let him go on the block. Ty says, well, listen, I'm already trying to convince Dan that Kuzi isn't telling me everything. So he won't think I had anything to do with it. And Zach says, Ty, do you think that I know strategy? I was like, yeah, we both know strategy. Do you think that I know people? Yeah, we both know people. Okay. Emotional intelligence is like the thing I'm the highest at in the world. So right now, Dan is the type of guy, when you tell him something bad, he freaks. So what he'll do is he'll scramble to someone. And it's not going to be me right now because he's going to think I'm part of this decision. So he's going to scramble to Shania. If that happens, what your fear is will be more likely to happen. And he'll be working with them and not us. So I was like, okay, so who should I tell her to? Johnny. She needs to keep the pressure on that group. Ty says, but then you're putting John up and he's not going home. And Zach says, that's happening regardless. If Santina touches the block, she's going home. Ty's like, no, that can't happen. He says, Kuzi is too worried about Dan. Zach says, no, listen. Tell her I've got Dan. He wanted to put Kuzi up last week, and I told him not to, and he didn't. And Ty's like, well, that's the problem. She knows where she stands with him. And Zach's like, but I have him. So she shouldn't be worried. Zach says, okay, listen. Because they get interrupted. Zach comes back to Ty a little bit later. He's like, okay, listen, I've thought about it for a second here. Because Ty's been pushing, okay, if not Dan, what about Renee? And Zach was explaining to him, Renee makes no sense. She's no reason to put Renee on the block. But Zach comes back and he says, okay, if you can get Santina and Johnny to buy back into our group by offering to keep them safe this week, then it can make sense to get Renee on the block instead. So what Zach is saying here is, because it's kind of weird, but to hopefully help you understand it. Zach is saying that if Ty can go to Santina and say, look, Kuzi is looking to put you and Jonathan on the block potentially, but I can try and talk to Kuzi for you and keep you safe, but only if you're willing to help us bring Jonathan back into the fold. So that basically I'm protecting you, Santina, and in return, you're going to help me go to Jonathan, and then both of us can go to Jonathan and say, we will protect you if you come back in with us. And then if that can work, then we can try and convince Kuzi. And when I say try and convince, Zach in this entire conversation is literally talking to Ty as though he's making the decision. He's saying, you should not put Renee on the block. You can't put Dan on the block. You should put Jonathan on the block. He's saying this to Ty as though Ty has complete control over Kuzi's HOH. So in their minds, it is, yes, then they will then put Renee on the block instead of Dan, and keep both Santina and John safe. And Zach's like, well, or Ty's like, well, she's going to put Santina on the block. And he's like, well, then we'll just say we tried. Like, the idea that he can't control the HOH is foreign to him. So that becomes the new plan, because Ty does not want Santina to go, and he's trying to figure out any option that he can to make sure that she stays. And so when Zach was like, you got to put Jonathan on the block, he's like, but the problem is that Jonathan will stay and Santina will go, which is not what he wants. So when Zach offers, well, we can get Renee on the block, he feels he can get Renee out. And so he's willing to go along with this plan. They also talk a little bit more about Claudia. Ty says he plans to act like he's taking a step back in the game from to Claudia. He's going to act like he agrees with Claudia that they should be more passive and not try to control things. And he also tells Zach, hey, plus, here's the thing. Claudia has told me things in this game that I can use to tank her if I need to. And Zach's like, why would you do that? He's like, no, she's just told me things about like Renee and the girls that I can just use to just wreck her game. So I can do that if I need to. Okay, jeez. So that's the plan. That's the new plan for now. Hopefully you were able to follow all of that. It was pretty informative for both how they view the game and what they are thinking moving forward. Making it very clear to me again that even they are starting to recognize but not willing to actually admit that going after Rob last week was a mistake. And that they have put themselves in kind of a tricky situation. So we'll see where it goes. So Zach is going to go to Dan, and Ty is going to go to Santina. So first, Zach is talking to Dan. Dan says he enjoys working with Ty and he trusts him. Them plus the girls works well. How is Dan a better player than these two? How is Dan the only person that recognizes that there's plenty of connective tissue here, that all they need to do is say, Zach, Ty, Hope, connect with Claudia, Renee, and Shania. It's so simple. Zach, Ty, Hope, and Dan, I should say. Hope is connected to Renee. Ty's connected to Claudia. Dan is connected to Shania. There's so much connective tissue there that, yes, the women are skeptical of Zach in particular, but not super skeptical of Hope, Ty, or even Dan. It would be so easy to just make that connection. It's a 6 to then 7 person, if you're able to protect Zach, alliance in a house that is, 13 people right now. And none of those people are in danger this week, which means we're going down to a 12-person house very soon. And they have 7 with all of the, most of the best competitors, right? Quote unquote. It's very simple. And this is part of why I think it's very important to cut Dan out for Kuzi. So that's what Dan is thinking. Why not just work with these women? And Zach says, and I mean, he's not proposing. He's just saying he thinks that's a good idea. Zach says, well, I think you're good this week. I don't think Kuzi will touch you this week. But, we need to be careful. He says, you need to really stay away from Vanessa. Because the heat is on her right now. And if you're seen talking to her a lot, then that could put you in the line of fire. And Dan says, okay. And then Zach coaches Dan on how to word what he's saying to Kuzi, like literally word for word. He's like, don't say target, say, I think that we can build a relationship, so on and so forth. It's not terrible advice from Zach to Dan. And he's really just trying to coach Dan up, trying to make sure he's, speaking as optimally as possible when talking to Kuzi to avoid potentially being put on the block, which is, of course, what Zach does not want to happen. Zach asks Dan, do you still trust me after last week, right? Dan says, yes. It's like, I know people came at me. Dan's like, no, I got you. Don't worry about it. And Dan talks about him and Shania. He says, me and Shania were homies, but not a showmans, which is good. It's good for us. We won't be as much of a target, but we are connected. So I don't know how real that is, but that's their conversation. So in the meantime, Ty went and talked to Santina. He says, Santina, I know Kuzi is looking at you and Johnny. He's basically going through with exactly what Zach told him to, telling Santina that her and Jonathan are in trouble this week, but that he has a good enough relationship with Kuzi to stick his neck out and get Kuzi to not put her up or not put her in danger. But if he does that, do you think you have it in you, Santina, to build that trust again with Zach? And she says, maybe. She says, I just feel like anytime I talk to him, he tries to make me feel like I'm wrong. And he says, okay, well, what's your perfect alliance? She says, well, what we started with, I guess. At the end of the day, I really trust you, Ty, and I won't go against you. But my perfect scenario is working with you alone. And Ty says, well, I would hope that you can get to Jonathan and get him to come back to the fold. Is that something that you can do? And she says, I'm not sure. He says, well, let me tell you, the girls do not like you. So you should feel more comfortable with the people you started with. She says, okay. I'm on board trying that if that's what it takes. And then after Ty leaves, she's like, I'll do whatever I have to not go home. Whatever. So that's, again, this plan is in the works. So the current plan is for Ty and Santina to try to get Jonathan to come back into the fold. Ty is then going to try and convince Kuzi to put Renee on the block straight up instead of Santina, if possible. And if not possible, then just get Renee on the block as a replacement. This is a bit of a shame because, Zach's proposal of trying to get Jonathan on the block would have been a massive error on Ty's part, in my opinion. If Ty had tried to get Jonathan up as the replacement, that would have given Kuzi a ton of ammunition to use against Ty with Jonathan. And that would have been great. However, this is also potentially a huge mistake for Ty to try and get Renee on the block because Kuzi now has a ton of information on, if he goes through with this, Kuzi will have a ton of information on Ty for trying to put Renee on the block that she can use to help prevent the women from aligning with Ty and Zach. So either way, trying to control Kuzi's HOH, if it doesn't work, could be a massive mistake. Now, if it does work, then it works, right? But I would hope and I think that Kuzi will not just go along with what they want and will do what she wants, and then we'll just have a bunch of dirt on them. Very brief conversation between Vanessa and Renee, just talking about how Ty is 100% game all the time. Now, Zach made a comment saying that people are starting to catch on to Ty being a bigger threat than Zach. I don't know how true that is, but I thought it was interesting that we catch this little snippet from Vanessa and Renee talking about how Ty is just all game all the time, as well as the fact that apparently Ty and Claudia seem to be hashing it out about how gamey he is. It is possible that since the last couple of days when we got that diary room where a lot of people are talking about trusting Ty, it's possible that that's starting to degrade because they're seeing him as such a gamer. Hard to say, but we're getting some clues here. Kuzi has a conversation with Santina in the HOH room. And this is one of the last two conversations we get from the drop today. Kuzi says that she does not think that Santina is against her, but she does know that she's capable of winning competitions. And Santina says, sure, but I think that you might know who would be my target in the future. Implying Zach, but being vague. Which at this point is fair. You know, as much as I criticized Rob for being way overly vague when he was on the block last week, being vague at this stage, you know, when you're campaigning to the HOH, is not the worst idea. It can be bad, but it can also be good, because if Kuzi is already set on nominating you and you're naming names specifically, then you're just giving Kuzi ammunition against you to help send you home, which is another classic error. So you do have to kind of walk a fine line here. But Santina says, I hope there's not a target on my back for everything that happened with Rob. And Kuzi says, well, for me, there's not a target on your back because of the Rob situation. If there were a target on your back, it'd be because you're just a threat in the game. Dan knocks on the door, the HOH door, asks to be added to the queue. And I thought this was very funny because Kuzi told Ty, I'm putting up Vanessa and Santina. Ty said, I would want Vanessa gone. Kuzi says, I would put up Dan as a replacement. And the first two people looking to talk to her right away after Ty has a chance to talk to people are Santina and Dan. So Santina says, listen, Kuzi, when you told me not to be influenced by other people during my HOH week, I did not recognize what you were saying until after the fact. And that was a mistake on my end. And Kuzi says, I'm just having a hard time. I don't know what I'm going to do. She says, I'm hoping that the people I put up don't go home, but I also hate that stupid POV switch. So I tried coming up with something last night, but I've got to think about it again. And she does not give Santina any solid answers. Not a good sign for Santina. After Santina leaves, Kuzi says, damn it, I'm going to have to send you home after being so nice. Ugh. So Kuzi, at this point in time, definitely still plans to send Santina out if possible. I think her plan to put Vanessa and Santina very much still on the board. Dan is the replacement, still on the board. That is the plan for now. However, Ty's going to come in and have a conversation with Kuzi. And this is the last conversation we get on the drop. And it's actually interrupted by the end of the drop. As in, we don't get this full conversation. But this is basically pretty much the big push, I would imagine, from Ty to try and change things one more time. And just based on Kuzi's responses, I don't think he's going to succeed. But it's hard to know because we did not see the end of this conversation. So Ty asks, is Dan still the backup? And Kuzi says, yes, but I'm waiting to see what he says to me today. She says, I'll only put him up if Santina comes off because Vanessa is the pawn, but she's a disposable pawn. And if Vanessa left, she wouldn't be too upset, which I don't love from Kuzi. I mean, I like it if it's posturing, but if it's how she genuinely feels, I think, again, she's making a pretty big mistake potentially. Ty says, well, listen, the more I think about it, I don't think it's the smart move to put Dan on the block as the replacement. She says, why? I think there's a better option. She says, who? Ty says, well, first of all, I think that we need to target Vanessa and not Santina because I've got Santina and Zach's got Dan. And if both me and Santina work on John, then maybe we can pull him in. And if we have all of those people, we have the numbers. Again, I think it's important to note that Zach and Ty trust Kuzi the most of anyone in the house apart from themselves. And so when they're pitching to Kuzi and trying to get her to do things, they are genuinely trying to, like, the way that they're trying to pitch is for what's best for the alliance as a whole, because they think that Kuzi is fully invested in the alliance as a whole, if that makes sense. Because they genuinely trust that Kuzi is with them. And why I think this is going to not succeed is that they're not recognizing that Kuzi is playing for herself and not for them. And they actually believe that Kuzi might be playing for them, if that makes sense. But hard to say because we're not getting a ton of this. But so Kuzi says, let me tell you, Ty, Jonathan is so angry about the situation last week. I don't think you're ever going to get to a place where he fully trusts you ever again. And Ty's like, oof. I don't know. With both me and Santina working on it, maybe we can get back to business. And Kuzi says, listen, my problem with getting back to business is that business in the first week did not include me. I like new business. I don't want to go back to the old business. And that's when the drop ended. So Ty was trying. Ty was trying it here, of course. Whether or not he will succeed is still theoretically up in the air. But I do think that he will not succeed. I don't think that. I mean, it just makes no sense for Kuzi to put Jonathan on the block. It makes, like, Zach's argument to put Jonathan on the block makes sense if Kuzi is a fully loyal member of the Zach and Ty alliance. But we know she's not. And so it doesn't make a lot of sense for her to do that. So I don't think that's going to happen. I think her target is Santina. I think she's looking to take away one of Ty's numbers in Santina, somebody that she's not connected to, that is capable of winning competitions, that might do the work of Ty or Zach in the future. That she doesn't want that to happen. Now, I still think that Santina is a better player in the game for Kuzi than Dan. I think Dan is a more dangerous player overall. But I do think that taking Santina out is not bad by any means. It's probably the second best option for Kuzi, especially because Santina does seem to genuinely be pretty attached to Ty, and Ty is more threatening of a player than Zach in this house at this point in time, I believe, although that could be changing. The thing for me is, again, you have to look at the women in the game, Claudia, Renee, and Shania. And the reason I think that Dan is more dangerous than Santina is that the women do not like Santina. But they do like Dan, especially with his new connection to Shania. So that's my concern, right? And for as much as Ty is like, I'm worried about Dan, I don't know if we can trust Dan. Dan is capable of beating me in competitions. That's a mistake. Like there are a couple of major mistakes happening in the game, right? Ty not trusting Dan in the same way he didn't trust Rob, like a mistake. He should be working with Dan, using Dan, because Dan's very valuable to him. The women and the boys, Zach, Ty, Dan, Hope, not getting together, working together, Ty and Claudia not coming together. That's another mistake, right? And you could, like, in the game, you can exploit those mistakes, but I do think that you need to be careful about how long you exploit them for, because having to rely on people to continue to make mistakes is a riskier proposition than exploiting them now while it's still a mistake. Because all it takes is for Ty to recognize, wait a minute, why am I so set on Dan when I've got bigger targets, bigger threats to me? All it takes is for Ty to be like, why am I feuding with Claudia for no reason when I can just pull in Claudia and hope that she can help pull in the women for me, and then we've got a super group going on? Why are we trusting Kuzi so much when we don't have to, and it puts us in a worse position? Like, these are questions I don't want them to have a chance to ask, right? If I'm Kuzi. So either way, I think Santina leaving, not the worst play in the world. But you are, again, if Vanessa is on the block, leaving a vulnerability. And the vulnerability is particularly vulnerable because in order to keep Santina in the game against Vanessa, Zach and Ty will need to recruit the women for the vote, which provides them the very path that leads toward the danger that you're looking to avoid, I would imagine, if you're Kuzi. So we'll see what happens. I mean, this is a lot of speculation and a lot of like prediction based on very little. But this seems to be the state of the house at this point. So again, there is also the idea that this Canada Saves is coming in. I would imagine that it's going to go to either Jonathan or Vanessa. Much more likely in my eyes that it's Jonathan. If it is Jonathan, then Zach and Ty's idea of like, hey, we'll keep you safe, Jonathan, so be loyal to us, doesn't exactly work anymore. And it takes out one of their major avenues for who to pitch to Kuzi for her to put up. And so I imagine that, you know, for Zach, he's going to be very annoyed, I think, if Jonathan is safe, because he wanted Jonathan as the replacement. And if not Jonathan as the replacement, he did not want Renee to be pushed. The only way he wanted Renee to be pushed is if they were able to act like they were the ones that saved Jonathan and pull him in because of it. Jonathan's safe independently, then that leaves Renee as the only other option other than Dan that they've thought up so far, but with none of the benefit of what they were looking to do before. So I would imagine that they just continue along that line and keep pushing Renee, which again, I think is good for Kuzi, because if Vanessa and Santina go on the block after Ty has been pushing Renee, or even maybe continues to push Renee, and then Ty and Zach try to flip the vote against Vanessa to keep Santina, then Kuzi can use the fact that Ty tried to push Renee on the block as a way to prevent the women from flipping and get them to keep Vanessa over Santina, ideally, if Kuzi's able to play it that way. So, you know, some dangers, but that's about where we're at again here in the game, and that's probably going to be the last we hear from this house until Monday, where we see the nominations, the Canada saves, and also the result of the veto, and then we'll have a roundtable, hopefully in that order. So that's what we have for you for now. Hopefully you enjoyed all of the speculation that that is abound at this point. And that's what I have for you. So find me over on Twitch, twitch.tv/Taran Armstrong, having a good time over there watching these episodes. I'll be playing some Goose Goose Duck tomorrow, which will be a fun time. If you want to see some of our highlights, some of our best Goose Goose Duck and Among Us games, you can find them over on my YouTube channel. I'm posting those weekly. Very fun stuff over there. And you can find me on Twitter at Armstrong Taran. The Survivor Stock Watch will be happening in about 15 minutes. If you're here live and you want to see me talk about Survivor, then we're gonna kick that up very soon. So tune in for that. And that's about what I've got. So thank you all. Again, check out the exit interview with Rob that I did yesterday. Thought it was a good time. Had a fun time talking to Rob. So check that out. Thank you for joining me, and I will see all of you. I mean, maybe in 15 minutes, but also next time.